Ukraine is hitting hard and hitting fast. In a week that has been defined by counteroffensive operations, Ukraine has just forced Russia's troops to retreat on two fronts in a pair of massive assaults. This is humiliating for Russia. Its soldiers are running around like headless chickens as they face Ukrainian attacks unlike anything that they've seen before. As for Ukraine, it's using these counteroffensives to destroy Russia's 2026 war plans. Ukraine's two-pronged assault took place on the Dnipro and Oleksandrivsk fronts, and both have forced Russia into hasty retreats that will cause major issues for its 2026 strategy. We'll cover what happened in Oleksandrivsk later in the video. First, let's head to the Dnipro River and several patches of territory that Russia thought it had well under control. For months, Russia has held positions on the small islands in the Dnipro River. Putin's forces believed they were safe from any sort of Ukrainian counterattack. After all, they were on islands. For Ukraine to launch an attack, it would have to try to sail soldiers onto those islands, leaving its forces open to counterattacks by Russian drones and other munitions. Russia knew that all too well because it had spent a large part of 2025 sending soldiers on suicidal missions to take these very islands. Russia had succeeded at great cost, and Putin thought that Ukraine wouldn't dare respond with its own assaults for fear of losing valuable soldiers. Entrenched on these islands, Russian forces have been launching drone assaults against Ukraine's forces and civilians across the banks of the Dnipro River. The islands have become a collective of staging grounds, allowing Russia to attack Ukraine's elevated positions on the banks and launch assaults against the city of Dnipro, which is another of Russia's key targets. Ukraine knew it couldn't allow these attacks to go on. However, it also couldn't directly assault the Dnipro River islands. So as Russia enjoyed its supposed success and continued its strategy of terrorizing Ukraine's civilians, Ukraine's military leaders hatched a plan. If sending soldiers to the islands was out of the question, then they needed to come up with something else. Something smarter. And what they emerged with was a three-phase plan that systematically weakened Russia's island forces, resulting in them completely collapsing in one of the most intelligent counteroffensives we've seen during the Ukraine war so far. Ukraine Today reported on all three phases in a February 17th article linked to RFU News. Phase 1 avoided the Dnipro River and its islands altogether. Ukraine correctly identified that the isolated Russian troops on those islands would need supplies if they would have any chance to survive. Military heads also saw that much of the aerial pressure being sustained on Dnipro itself was coming as a result of Russia setting up command posts and depots along the Dnipro River front, which needed to be taken out. With this knowledge, Ukraine injected a deadly dose of venom into the Russian front lines. Drone operators from Ukraine's Venom unit started carrying out strikes against Russian positions that were being used by Russia's drone operators as storage and launch points. They weren't any old drone strikes. Ukraine used specially converted drones that carried devastating TM62 mines, which were fitted with stabilizing fins that allowed them to be deployed from the drones so they could fly over their targets. Think of it like the glide bomb strategy in miniature. The strategy proved very effective. Ukraine has been using the TM62s for all sorts of purposes over the last few months. In January, Forbes reported that the mines have become something of an all-purpose weapon. Made during the Soviet era and packing 7.5 kilograms or about 16.5 pounds of high explosives, TM62s are the most widely used anti-tank mines in the world. And that's how Russia expected Ukraine to use them, to make minefields designed to slow down Russia's tanks. But what Ukraine has done is create a modernized version of the TM62 called the TM2025, which is made using 3D printers and contains both electromechanical and secondary fuses, which allow for remote detonation. And that brings us back to the Phase 1 portion of Ukraine's Dnipro River strategy. The Venom unit sent TM62s Russia's way by air, likely taking advantage of the remote detonation capabilities of the enhanced versions that Ukraine uses to wreak havoc. Russia's storage depots and command facilities were degraded during these explosive strikes, which served the crucial purpose of crippling Russia's ability to conduct drone reconnaissance or to strike back against Ukraine's forces. Russia's Dnipro River island forces became more vulnerable than ever before, but Ukraine didn't rush in. Instead, it launched Phase 2. This time, Ukraine's FPV drone operators focused their attention on the boat crossing and reinforcement routes that Russia had established on the Dnipro River. We mentioned earlier that cutting off supplies to the island's forces would be a nightmare for Putin's troops. That's what Phase 2 of Ukraine's brilliant counteroffensive strategy was all about. With the routes under constant attack, Russia could no longer evacuate wounded soldiers from the island. They would be left to die and fester among their comrades. Ukraine's drones took out enemy motorboats as they approached the islands, cutting off those soldiers on the isolated patches of land from the basics such as food and water that they need to survive. Russia was reduced to trying to use drones to ferry supplies to its soldiers, but Phase 1 of Ukraine's brilliant strategy had made that almost impossible. At this point, Russia's Dnipro River Island soldiers were getting desperate. Some were even trying to run away, desperately using reeds as cover, only to get shot to pieces by Ukraine's drones. As all of this was going on, Ukraine was also targeting command and observation posts in the occupied regions of Oleksandrivsk. This part of the strategy was months in the making. Even before Russia occupied the Dnipro River islands, Ukraine had destroyed the Oleksandrivsk bridge via an ASAM hammer strike launched by one of its MiG-29s. Similar strikes also destroyed command and observation posts. This part of the phase removed more of Russia's eyes and ears over the Dnipro River forces and created disruption across the chain of command. If the island forces were vulnerable after Phase 1, they were terrified, isolated, and starving following Phase 2. Then came Phase 3 of Ukraine's counteroffensive. With Russia's forces isolated, Ukraine focused on systematically weakening their already shambolic defenses through sustained and cumulative strikes against the forces themselves. Those Russian soldiers had no drone cover. Phase 1 took care of that. They also weren't receiving orders or warnings from higher-ups due to Phase 2. All they could do was run around like headless chickens, vainly hoping that Ukraine's drones and munitions wouldn't get them. Hideouts were destroyed. The few logistical points that the soldiers had been using to receive drone supply drops were taken out. Whenever Russia's island soldiers were foolish enough to gather, a Ukrainian strike wouldn't be far behind. Little by little, FPV drone attacks and aerial strikes whittled away at defensive infrastructure, leading to the Dnipro River forces facing a choice: die on the islands or get out of Dodge. Many have already been smart enough to do the latter, just like the forces in Oleksandrivsk we'll get to in a moment. Citing intelligence data, Ukrainian military spokesperson Vladislav Voloshin says that Russia has already withdrawn its forces from some of the Dnipro River islands as Ukraine's three-phase strategy took its toll on their morale and psychological conditions. Nobody can blame those soldiers. They did exactly what Ukraine expected them to do after the counteroffensive snatched away their supplies and left them to a fate of being bombed out of existence if they didn't run. Now, RFU News says Russia's high command believes that taking the Dnipro islands is a fruitless endeavor. Russia doesn't have the resources it needs to support the troops on those islands, and that means that Russia's staging grounds for assaults on Dnipro and the surrounding regions have disappeared. Don't underestimate how huge this is for Ukraine. From a military perspective, it obviously means that Ukraine's forces along the banks of the Dnipro River can operate more freely. They may not choose to fully retake the Dnipro River islands, that remains to be seen, but leaving those islands empty takes away a major attack vector for Russia, which relieves substantial amounts of pressure on Ukrainian forces that are actively building stronger fortifications in preparation for the rest of 2026. But the impact of this counteroffensive may be felt more clearly on the civilian front. Russia is engaged in a campaign of terrorizing Ukraine's non-combatants ever since Putin launched his invasion. In October, Reuters reported that Russian drone operators were even purposefully chasing down Ukrainian civilians with their flying monstrosities in a twisted sort of human safari designed to make it impossible for anybody to live anything like a normal life in Ukraine. Russia ramped up its terrorism in 2025, leading to civilian casualties rising by 26% compared to 2024. According to Action on Armed Violence, 2,248 civilians were reported killed by Russia during the year, with another 12,493 being injured by Russia's drone assaults on cities. The odds are high that some of those casualties happened in Dnipro. With the Dnipro River islands cleared, people in the surrounding regions can breathe a little easier. Now, if the first of the counteroffensives that we've covered was about relieving pressure, the second was all about getting ready for a summer that Russia intends to turn into a grind for Ukraine. But before we go deeper into that, this is The Military Show, and we deliver the full picture, not just the headlines. Make sure you're subscribed so you stay ahead of the curve. Let's move on to Oleksandrivsk and what's happening to Russia on that front. On February 17th, Militani reported on comments made by the Ukrainian military's commander-in-chief, Oleksandr Syrskyi, who said that Ukraine was still in the process of launching counteroffensives in the Oleksandrivsk region near the key city of Huliapola. Ukraine's air assault forces and standard assault forces are actively engaged in operations in this region, which seems to mean that they're pushing through the grey zones, being infiltrated by small units of Russian soldiers to clear those infiltrators out. Our units carry out effective counterattack, assault operations, effectively use unmanned systems, artillery, radio-electronic combat equipment, Syrskyi reported during a visit to the combat lines. Ukraine's commander-in-chief also asserted that liberating the territories that Ukraine is currently targeting is a priority, but its forces must do so intelligently to preserve the lives of as many of its soldiers as possible. That may be the key point with Ukraine's second assault. For many, the retaking of territory in Oleksandrivsk seems like it could be setting the stage for a much larger counteroffensive, perhaps even a full-blown push into Huliapola. That isn't the case, as you're going to discover in a few minutes. Rather, and much like the three-phase plan that Ukraine implemented in the Dnipro River, Ukraine is systematically eliminating Russian occupiers to retake key pieces of territory, that it's going to use for a very important purpose as we draw toward the midpoint of 2026. So what did the Oleksandrivsk operation achieve? The short answer: significant gains for Ukraine that will become very important very soon. Militani points this out with a series of maps that show that Ukraine has made localized gains across several sections of the front lines between February 9th and 16th. In the Oleksandrivsk and Hulia sectors, the Russian front has been pushed back significantly, allowing Ukraine to liberate several settlements, along with clearing territory outside of those settlements that will serve the purpose that we're going to reveal soon. According to the Telegraph, this Oleksandrivsk push has been carried out alongside a larger push in the Zaporizhia region, resulting in Ukraine taking back the largest amount of land that it's managed to liberate since its ultimately ill-fated large-scale counteroffensive against Moscow's invading forces back in the summer of 2023. All told, the outlet says Ukraine has managed to take 78 square miles, or a little over 200 square kilometers, of territory back from Russia in 5 days. To rub salt in what is already a gaping wound for Russia, the outlet adds that this amount of territory is roughly equal to what Russia managed to occupy during the entire month of December 2025. What we see here is Ukraine taking advantage of something that happened to Russia earlier in February: the loss of Starlink. We've made the headless chickens joke a couple of times already in this video, but it really applies to what's happening to Russia's soldiers in Oleksandrivsk. Following SpaceX's decision to shut down the illegal Starlink terminals that Russia was using for everything from its long-range drone strikes to communications on the front lines, Russia's forces have been adrift without command. Up to 90% of the country's units are believed to have lost connectivity to a network that they desperately needed to help them organize their assaults on Ukraine's defenses. Naturally, those assaults have mostly stopped. Those that are still happening are sloppy and unorganized, and as Russia's soldiers are increasingly isolated from high command by the loss of their communication capabilities, Ukraine has been taking advantage in places like Oleksandrivsk and Zaporizhia. Also, somewhat underreported is the fact that this latest series of counterattacks builds on something that Ukraine has been doing toward the end of 2025. In December, Interfax reported that Ukraine had managed to recapture territory in the settlements of Udachny, Rashina, and Kotlina, all of which lie west of the embattled city of Pokrovsk. These were smaller gains than the ones we're seeing now, but it's clear that Ukraine is going on the offensive against Russia. Again, a brilliant Ukrainian strategy is behind all of this. Though accelerated by Russia's loss of Starlink, Ukraine has long been positioning its artillery, logistics, drone operators, and most of its forces between 6 and 12 miles, or 9.65 to 19.3 kilometers, behind Russia's positions. This has allowed for the creation of a massive grey zone that is infested with Ukrainian drones and has been a death trap for Russia's soldiers. What we're seeing in Oleksandrivsk now is the outcome of that grey zone strategy. With Russia's infiltrating forces weakened, Ukraine's air and ground assault troops were able to push forward and reclaim territory on which Russia had only the most tenuous of grasps in the first place. Russia is still trying to push on into the regions where Ukraine is now retaking territory, but according to Siersky, its forces are having practically no success at all. The enemy is not abandoning his intentions to break through our battle formations and is carrying out constant attacks, including with the use of munitions, but without significant success, Siersky said in a Telegram post that mirrors his Facebook statement. Ukraine's commander-in-chief added, "The soldiers of the defense forces are holding the designated lines and positions, disrupting the enemy's intentions and inflicting significant losses on him in manpower and equipment." And it's Russia's attempts to maintain its offensives in Oleksandrivsk and elsewhere that reveal the true reason for the second of Ukraine's counteroffensives. This is a case of Ukraine putting everything that it has to take territory now so that it's ready for what's to come. Making hay while the sun shines, so to speak, though it's perhaps more accurately a case of clearing out the Russian occupiers while they freeze in their grey zone hidey holes. The reason that Ukraine wants to turn the grey zones into liberated territory is that it's preparing for a summer where Russia is believed to be intending to renew its push against Ukraine. According to a February 9th article in the Kyiv Post, Russia has spent the last few months accumulating strategic reserves for what it intends to be a large-scale assault on Ukraine's eastern and potentially southern sectors during the late spring and into the summer. If you're getting echoes of Russia's failed summer 2025 offensive, which failed to take Pokrovsk or create the buffer zones in northeastern Ukraine that Putin wanted, then you're right on the money. This time around, Russia intends to push toward the cities of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk in the Donetsk region, the Kyiv Post reports, with the ultimate goal of forcing Ukraine's ground forces into a large battle that will allow Russia to destroy them. Ukraine would be foolish to fight the kind of fight that Putin wants. The new summer offensive seems designed to force the kind of traditional war that Russia prefers, which is also a war that would see Ukraine abandon its asymmetric approach in favor of a straight fight. Of course, Ukraine isn't going to do that. And that's why it's taking as much territory as it can now. Every inch of that territory is going to be filled with the sorts of defenses and fortifications that Ukraine has already been using to tear up Russian soldiers in places like Pokrovsk. So think of what Ukraine has just done in Oleksandrivsk as the pushing back of the Russian lines, so it can turn what were once grey zones into even more devastating kill zones. Ahead of the summer offensive, to which Russia is supposedly going to dedicate 100,000 troops, Ukraine has put Russia into a position where it will have to fight to reclaim what it likely wanted to use as staging grounds. This is brilliant. Why? Well, think back to what we said about Russia building up its strategic reserves for the summer. If Russia now has to reoccupy territory that Ukraine has liberated, we'll have to push more soldiers into Ukraine's kill zones. Those soldiers will be torn up, forcing the use of reserves that Putin wanted to keep for the summer. The more of those reserves that Ukraine can destroy in places like Oleksandrivsk and elsewhere, the weaker the summer assault becomes. And that's how Ukraine will force Putin into a repeat of the summer of 2025. Russia will be left with grand plans and even grander claims that lie in tatters, and it's all due to Ukraine pulling off a series of precise and intelligent counteroffensives where it's sacrificed very little in return for massive gains. As the Atlantic Council noted in January, the defenses that Ukraine already has are causing Russia to pay massive prices, both financially and in the blood of its soldiers, to make paltry gains. With those gains being reversed by Ukraine in Oleksandrivsk, Russia will have to pay those heavy prices all over again before it can even think of moving forward in the summer. Russia doesn't have what it needs to pay those prices, and it has long ago run out of credit. After 4 years of fighting, the Ukraine war is over for Putin. He's just too arrogant to know it. His stupid strategies have led to his army to absorb the largest troop losses in modern history, and it's only going to get worse for Russia from here. Find out more by watching our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more analysis of Ukraine's battlefield movements and the impact they have on Russia. And thanks for watching.